welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dunya Medhat, and I'm a junior consultant at Turner & Townsend. We are joined today by my colleague, Julian Boss. The purpose of this event is it is a Retrofit Information Support and Expertise, or RISE event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, delivered by Turner & Townsend. There will be a relatively short presentation, followed by plenty of opportunity to ask questions and for discussion. The event will be an hour long and will finish on time. Please keep your microphones muted and cameras switched off during the presentation. The slide deck will be made available after the event in a follow-up email to everyone that has joined us today. There will be a clean recording of this and all other masterclasses in the resources section of our RISE website. We'll provide all of our useful links in the chat. Please ask questions in the chat function as we go, or there will be an opportunity to ask questions directly after the presentation. And finally, there will be a quick poll and word cloud at the end of the session. Please complete them to help us understand the level of knowledge in our topics. I will now hand over to Julian to start today's presentation.
Thanks, Dunya. Welcome everyone to this supply chain masterclass on PAS 2035. As Dunya said, I'm a principal consultant with Turner & Townsend, and very much kind of embedded with the PAS 2035, PAS 2030 standards around retrofits. Just going to be covering these areas during our session, just move on with that. Hang on a second. I'm just let me get the slides working properly. There we go. So, what is PAS 2035? It is the British standard, basically, for retrofitting of domestic dwellings. It's first published in 2019, and the standard outlines how retrofit projects should really be managed and delivered. PAS 2030 is basically a kind of partner standard. It is a certification for installers, and it needs to, and basically installers certified to PAS 2035 are required to meet the requirements of PAS 20. If you're certified to PAS 2030, you're required to meet PAS 2035 requirements within that. There is also a PAS 2031, which manages the process of certification to PAS 2030. There is another PAS, which is PAS 2038, which is the retrofit standard for non-domestic buildings. So some of you may be operating in companies which are already working on non-domestic buildings, so commercial buildings, and might be aware of PAS 2038. So what is the purpose of it? It's basically there to provide a guide to the holistic retrofit approach for domestic dwellings, which considers buildings as a whole system, basically of the kind of fabric, the interfaces of the building elements, the occupants, their use of the building, and you kind of look at the whole of that, and the interdependencies of those different parts, which actually affect how you will retrofit and the kind of measures you might consider if you're operating on a limited budget. So where does the PAS come from? There's a sort of timeline there which kind of takes us through. There's a particular well-documented case study of a failed CESP, I think it is, project, the Fishwick estate in Preston, which was had external wall insulation fitted as part of a CESP-funded project. And it was basically very, very poor quality, no design, no proper detailing, very poor installation, etc., and not unsurprisingly, the results were very bad for the buildings and the occupants, and the kind of resultant kind of fallout from that is still ongoing to this day. Anyway, that and a few other kind of instances of poor retrofit and poor outcomes led to a commissioning of a report called the Each Home Counts report in 2015. That was published in 2016. It had recommendations for a standard, a quality mark. It recommended various things that related to protecting the consumer, the customer, the resident, and the building. So it was really focusing on how to turn around a kind of legacy of poor retrofit into something where installers and other people working within the kind of retrofit sector would have standards to meet and qualifications, etc., which would improve the overall outcome for delivery. In 2019, that was the first PAS 2035 was launched, and there have been various iterations, improvements, and sort of addendums added to that version. But in 2023, quite a large update was launched, which is now available through the BSI website, along with a new version of PAS 2030. And they're freely available on the BSI website. They're basically up until March 31st, 2025 this year. Both of those standards can be used, but after the 31st of March, the earlier version will be withdrawn, and only the 2023 version will be available. I just covered that in what I said earlier, actually a little bit more detail on it. So PAS 2035 2019 was the original version, launched back in 2019, alongside a version of PAS 2030, the installer certification standard. I think I'm trying to remember what the latest version was called of this, but there is a 2022 version update of this earlier version of PAS, and then, as I say, 2023 a new version was launched, which will be the only one available after 30th of March, 2025. So what is it that PAS requires of people who are working to this standard? So these are the sort of key elements. Basically, any home receiving an install requires a whole dwelling assessment from a retrofit assessor. The retrofit assessor is someone who is qualified as a domestic energy assessor, but with required to do additional occupancy assessments, and also there is a requirement to also look for any underlying defects within the building, such as evidence of damp, movement. Anything which, if you were going to be working on elements of the building, would be considered as a fault that would need rectifying before any retrofit works were going to go ahead. Every completed retrofit requires basic monitoring, and some will require further monitoring if performance of the retrofit is seen to be below that which is expected. So the basic monitoring is really around looking at energy use, energy bills, talking to residents about whether their energy use has changed since the retrofit. Some people, find that because they can now heat their home because it's been retrofitted, drafts may have been eliminated, insulation added, in lofts on walls, maybe double glazing, maybe uprating of the heating system, etc., etc. Suddenly their home can actually be heated, and therefore they're used to spending a budget on their heating, but now they're actually creating a warm environment in their home, and so they don't actually spend any less, but they are in fact warm and more comfortable. So there could be various different elements sort of affecting energy use that might not be obvious. In some instances, they might use less energy to keep the same temperature, but it could be that they use the same amount of energy to actually now have a comfortable home environment. There is a requirement for retrofit advice to be delivered with every install. So that's obviously explaining to residents and to clients, if you're doing social housing retrofit, the kind of key points and making sure that there's a in-depth understanding of what retrofit is for and what to expect. Handover to the resident must be considered and provided where relevant. So this is all about them understanding what's been done to a property, if there's new systems or controls or things that need to be explained. So maybe the ventilation's been changed to a system which is on constantly and boosts when it needs to, as opposed to occasional extractor fan use in kitchens and bathrooms. There might be changes there which people don't really understand, and that kind of thing needs to be explained to them. And the last point there, PAS 2030 is the install standard to comply with within the PAS 2035 standards, and there is separate guidance on this. So there are basically 6 stages to delivery under PAS 2035, and a role called the retrofit coordinator is the person who is involved from start to finish and has responsibility to see that these stages are completed and compliant. So you can see here we have basically different stages explained here, and they loosely correspond to different stages of this sort of flow chart. So we're looking at the intended outcomes from the start. What is it that you want to achieve? Then looking at the risk assessment. So, all these elements of, from what kind of occupants, are they elderly, vulnerable, young families, etc. What about the building? Is it a standard design, non-standard design? Is it listed or in a conservation area? All these kind of questions around risk that you need to be aware of. The dwelling assessment, which needs to be done by the retrofit assessor, as I mentioned earlier. Then planning and design, which is working with that retrofit assessment and looking what kind of measures could be installed to achieve the intended outcomes. So if one of the intended outcomes is you want to achieve EPCC, then you would be looking at how you can target measures to the dwelling to achieve that. Then there's the installation and handover, which is the responsibility of the installer, this section here, and PAS 2030, clause 9, which refers to these different parts of the installation and handover. Lastly, monitoring and evaluation. So that's, as I said, assessing if the measures installed are working properly, and that the householder, the occupant, is happy with the systems and how to use them and understands how to control, the heat, the ventilation, etc., etc. So I mentioned the retrofit coordinator a couple of slides back, and this we're now going to look at the various roles. So PAS 2035 does stipulate different roles for individuals within the process. The retrofit coordinator is kind of the key person within who oversees that everything is compliant, so that a retrofit assessor, a qualified retrofit assessor, is going to do the assessment piece. Qualified retrofit designer is going to do the design piece. A certificated PAS 2030 installer is going to install the measures that are chosen, and that a retrofit evaluation, generally done by the retrofit coordinator, unless it's a specialist building, maybe a listed building, maybe of cultural significance, or there might be various other reasons why a specific person needs to be involved at that stage. But anyway, for most properties, the retrofit coordinator is probably the person going to be doing the evaluation role. And just some brief explanation of some of the roles. So the retrofit assessor, as I mentioned, conducts a detailed assessment of dwellings, including energy performance, condition, occupancy, looking at possible structural risks, and that assessment is used as the basis for the retrofit design, I should say. Retrofit coordinator, they manage the entire retrofit process, ensuring compliance with PAS 2035. They act as the main point of contact and oversee the assessments, design, and installation. A retrofit designer, they prepare the designs, working from the assessment report and looking at the specific needs of that dwelling, and really being very particular about the technical designs for the measures in that dwelling. Basically, a lot of you hear a lot that retrofit design generally fails at the junctions and interfaces of different building elements. So those are the key areas which need good detailed design work. So last couple here, the retrofit installer. So they would carry out the actual installation of the retrofit measures, and they have the PAS 2030 certification for the measure that they are installing. So it's not a case of having a certification to PAS 2030 and you can install whatever you like. You are certified to install a particular measure. And it is their responsibility to maintain the quality of the workmanship on that with the oversight of the retrofit coordinator. Retrofit evaluator, as I mentioned, the role is more of a stage. Right now, it generally is conducted by the retrofit coordinator, and they conduct a post-retrofit evaluation basically to see that everything is compliant, performance is meeting expectations, or if it's not, then addressing any defects or doing further investigation to understand why there might be a performance gap. So I mentioned that there's a new version of PAS 2035, and I'm just going to look at some of the key changes. So PAS 2035 and 2030, the 2023 version, is a full revision of the document and introduces the following principal changes. So the risk assessment process has been simplified to avoid unintended complexities. In the earlier version, there was basically a risk assessment which classified projects as risk A, B, or C, depending on 5 different factors. That's now been replaced with one risk assessment, but then there's additional kind of assessment required if a building is listed or in a conservation area, and therefore the services of a listed building specialist are required. There are changes of emphasis from a measures-based retrofit to a whole dwelling retrofit. So, as I said, thinking more about the whole house as a system, and including more reference to a main contractor. And there is clarification of the role of the retrofit coordinator, including site visits, and recording of any non-compliance. The contents of what is called the medium-term improvement plan is now a requirement rather than sort of requested as in guidance. So yeah, a medium-term improvement plan is absolutely a requirement of the process. And the requirements to produce an air tightness strategy for projects, which can include setting of an air tightness target and air leakage testing. And that's basically referring to obviously the uncontrolled ventilation, as it's sometimes referred to. A lot of older buildings are very leaky. And actually, it might be that the retrofit assessor or coordinator might take the view that actually an air tightness test is required and that particular draft proofing measures are required if the air permeability is too high and actually would negate the effect of any other fabric measures. So that the movement of air through the property, through the dwelling, actually would kind of bypass any effects of insulation. So they would need to address that kind of draft proofing element. There is also clarification what happens in past 2035 if historic significance is identified. As I've mentioned earlier, there might be a request for or requirement for a sort of listed building specialist or someone who has particular experience with older buildings and the materials that they're made of. And it's really around risk to the building that you don't apply inappropriate materials and then cause rapid degradation of those of the materials the building's made of, particularly to do with moisture. It's a key thing is basically the proper management of moisture in buildings. Annex C has been simplified and brought in line with the new approved document F, which is building regulations that deals with ventilation. So basically the rule is if you are retrofitting, you are likely to improve the air tightness of the building, so you're reducing the number of drafts, that uncontrolled ventilation. And if you're doing that, then you do need to have a ventilation strategy. So with regard to the people in the building, there could be young families, it could be older people, it could be a few generations, might be lots of cooking, washing, etc., etc. So the amount of moisture, smells from cooking, etc., what needs ventilating out needs to be managed according to the building's use. Further monitoring and evaluation references in the new BS 40101, which is a new sort of standard that's coming out, which refers to, I thought it was a building assessment actually, BS 40101. There's a new standard for building performance evaluation, monitoring and evaluation, which is now considered from the inception through to completion. So it's something to be aware of from the start to the finish of the project. I need to check that actually. Anyway, moving on, the next point, a process has been included whereby distressed replacement of heating appliances, i.e. a boiler. So basically talking about emergency replacement of boilers can be retrospectively assessed as compliant with past 2035. Normally, if you were looking at replacing a heating system, you would be doing it as part of a retrofit. That's in terms of what we're talking about here. But if you end up having to do this as an emergency, middle of winter, boiler fails, it's not repairable because it's too old, and you need to fit a new boiler in a hurry, then you could you could get the kind of PAS 2035 assessment and compliance certification done retrospectively because of it being a distress replacement. Guidance and requirements of climate resilience and adaptation in retrofit have also been strengthened. So that's obviously to do with having buildings that can cope with hotter temperatures and or more extreme weather events, heavier rain, heavy rain bursts, etc. So thinking about removing water, rainwater goods, roofing, drainage, those kind of things need to be considered with a little bit more importance kind of being emphasized on those things. Also requirements and qualifications for independent inspection and pre-installation building inspection in some PAS 2030 annexes have been strengthened, and requirements and guidance around moisture in buildings has been brought in line with the language used in BS 5250. As I mentioned earlier, there's the majority of risks in retrofit are around moisture being properly managed in buildings. Once you retrofit them, so you don't leave what are called cold bridges, so particular cold areas in corners, around windows, doors, etc., which will basically attract moisture, leading to condensation, leading to mold, damp, rot, etc., etc. These are the things which present risks to human health and to building structures. They cost landlords a lot of money, social landlords, with cleaning and repainting, and then eventually repairing rot because of damp issues. And this is all about managing that damp and providing adequate ventilation. So just referring back to what is PAS 2030, as I mentioned, it is a certification standard for installation of retrofit measures, and it sits within the overarching structure of PAS 2035. It's a kind of sub-part of it, very important part of it, but it's a sort of important sub-element within PAS 2035. And it is the industry specification for all energy efficiency installers, so that they're certified PAS 2030 as part of the 2035 overarching standard. So a few points on becoming PAS 2035 certified. So understanding the standard. As I said, it's available freely through the BSI website. It's not the most scintillating read, but it's worth trying to get through it in a few visits. I'd be impressed if you did it in one go. Learn what the requirements are for installing energy efficiency measures. Think about training, so complete relevant training to meet competency standards and quality management system. It's to do with ensuring compliance, certification bodies. So you basically need to become accredited through a UCAS training body to start that certification process. Audit preparation. So you need to be prepared for audits of your installations, and ready to address any non-conformity of installations you may have done. And non-conformity could be that you don't have quite the right bit of paperwork, but it is all important. It needs to, the whole part of this is to make sure that the qualities of installations are high, and where something has gone wrong, it can be traced back and repaired, and that the resident doesn't end up liable or with a bill for someone else's mistake, in effect. And maintaining compliance, so staying up to date with any changes to PAS 2030, and as I mentioned, passing regular audits. So you may have heard of the Warm Homes Social Housing Fund, or Warm Homes Local Grant, which are the Labour government's recent grant award schemes for retrofit. So basically, with those government-funded schemes, there are kind of requirements around the ensuring quality. So on that top one, we've got the PAS. So projects must comply with the latest PAS 2035 standards for retrofitting dwellings. Measures must be installed by PAS 2030 certified professionals. Trustmark, which is the quality mark for PAS 2035 installations. Installers must be Trustmark registered and meet all Warm Homes requirements. Measures must also be logged in the Trustmark retrofit portal. And the last one there, MCS, which is Micro Generation Certification Scheme, and that is the sort of certification for installers of low carbon heating and photovoltaic systems and heat pumps. So where you're having those building services, heating systems installed, that needs to be done by an MCS certified installer. And these are just a few useful links that you might be able to access, or you'll be able to access via the website, RISE website. And the links are there in the presentation slides. As I say, there's other resources with you can download documents which explain in a bit more detail about the PAS standards and the Each Home Counts report, etc. And these are a few other materials that you can access as well, other recordings of masterclasses or toolkits, etc., etc. So you are free to peruse those and listen into podcasts, etc., of different people explaining, the nuances of the PAS and how to get your certifications, etc. So, yep, that's it. And I'll be ready to take any questions.